This is Anarchast.
Hi, Lizzie.
Well, hello, Marilu, and welcome everybody to Gadsen Rising. And I'm Libby Gadsen, and our special guest today is Jeff Berwick. And Marilu, can you please tell the audience about Jeff?
Yes, Jeff is the host of Anarchast.com, your home for anarchy podcasts, where anarchy means freedom, peace, love, prosperity, free markets, power to the people, and the desire to live without a violent, coercive state. He is also the chief editor of The Dollar Vigilante, a newsletter focused on investments and expatriation information to survive the coming collapse of the U.S. dollar-based financial system. He is also a contributing editor at many of the world's largest libertarian, financial, and precious metals-related websites, including LouRockwell.com, The Daily Reckoning, Whiskey and Gunpowder, Kitco, Gold Eagle, SafeHaven.com, and Market Oracle. He is a speaker at many of the world's most important hard money, investment, and freedom conferences, including Libertopia, the San Francisco and New York Hard Assets shows, the PDAC held in Toronto, the Silver Summit, and all the Cambridge House conferences in Vancouver, Calgary, Montreal, Toronto, and Saskatoon. He founded Canada's largest financial website, Stockhouse.com, in 1994. It expanded into 8 different countries, had 250 employees, and a market capitalization of $240 million at the peak of the tech bubble. To this day, more than 1 million investors use Stockhouse.com for investment information every month. He sold the company in 2002 and continued as a director until 2007. He then traveled the world by sailboat, but after a year, his boat sank in a storm off the coast of El Salvador. After being saved, clinging to his surfboard with nothing left but a pair of surfing shorts, he decided to live nowhere and travel the world as spontaneously as possible to see and understand the world with his own eyes, not through the lens of the media. He visited nearly 100 countries over 4 years and did and saw things that no education could ever teach. He met amazing people, from self-made billionaires to some of the brightest minds in finance, as well as entrepreneurs from a broad range of backgrounds and locations, from tech companies in southern China to resource developers in Mongolia, Thailand, Russia, and Chile. He also reads everything he can find on how the world really works, politically and financially. He expatriated from his country of birth, Canada, and considers himself a citizen of the world. He has lived in numerous locales since, including Los Angeles, Hong Kong, and Bangkok. He currently lives in Acapulco, Mexico, and is building an anarchist community in Chile called Galt's Gulch. Welcome to the show, Jeff. It's great to have you.
Oh, it's great to be here. I didn't realize I've done so many things. That must be why I feel so tired nowadays.
I was preparing the bio, and I was like, wow, this is the perfect guest for Libby, because she is an anarchist expat too.
Great.
Yeah, I just had time to get it out before the commercials came on. And it's fabulous to have you on the show, Jeff, because you've done so much and you're really living the dream that so many people are trying to live, I think, in terms of philosophy and economically. And now I see you describe yourself as an anarcho-communist.
No, anarcho-capitalist. The exact opposite.
Oh, capitalist.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so we're fine there. I agree. I'm also an anarcho-capitalist. And what brought you to anarchy? Because it's a word that's highly misunderstood because of mass media propaganda, I think. So can you give us your take on what anarchy is and what anarcho-capitalism is, please?
Sure, yeah. I've always sort of lived as an anarchist, but I didn't really know it until someone told me what the word meant. Of course, like most people, I didn't really understand the word too much, because what the media always puts out, if someone breaks a Starbucks window, they say it's anarchist. If there's a bomb somewhere, they say it's anarchist. And that's all part of their propaganda. To me, anarchy, if you take it to its logical extent, just the core of it is non-aggression. So the non-aggression principle, which basically means you don't initiate force against anyone else, and you don't want anyone to initiate force against you. And of course, when you think about what that means, and when you think about what the government is force and coercion and theft. That is what they do. And so if you believe in this philosophy, then you cannot believe that you would want government.
Yes. Someone, I think, is sitting outside on a terrace. I hear a lot of wind. Are you on a terrace in Acapulco someplace?
Yes, I am.
Jeff?
Yes, I am.
I was wondering that too.
Sounds like it. Sounds like I can hear the wind. So, and I'm calling from Barcelona, so this is great. We've got all kinds of weather going on here as well. It's windy, but I'm inside. So, Jeff, now you also have an anarchy group that you're building called Gulch in Chile, and tell us how that's going.
Well, it's going good. We've just recently started. We started about 4 or 5 months ago. It came about organically. We were just telling people that they should look to get outside of the Western nation states for a while. I foresee a major economic collapse and a monetary and financial system collapse, and I don't think it's going to be too much fun. And I haven't lived in the West for about 10 years, and it's much nicer anyway, so why not? And because I've been telling people about it, and I have a lot of subscribers to Dollar Vigilante and on things like Anarchast, and people said, well, where should we go? And we found this place in Chile that we thought was perfect, and it's beautiful. And Chile is one of the more freer countries on earth right now. They have very little regulation, very low tax. Their central bank isn't Keynesian, so they're not printing a lot of money. And so we started up a community there, and I thought, well, there's no better name for it than Gulch.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I know why you named it Gulch. Can you tell us, our audience, why you named it Gulch?
Sure. It's after the book by Ayn Rand called Atlas Shrugged. And the general theme of the book was just like we're living today. It's actually, we're almost reenacting that book today as all these governments become more socialist, their taxes keep rising, their welfare state is collapsing. They're starting to take more and more of people's money. You're seeing that in France right now with a 75% top income tax rate. Many income tax rates in the U.S., when you add in the federal and state, is over 50% now. And in the book Atlas Shrugged, they began taking so much away from productive people that they went on strike. They just quit working, and they all moved to a place which at that time was in Colorado, called Gulch, and they all just went there to get away from the nation states and the socialist governments.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think about all the quote-unquote wars going on in the world right now? What's your take on the reasoning behind this? Is this going to encourage the economic collapse? Is this all part of a grand scheme of things with the powers that be, do you think?
I don't really know if they're trying to collapse the system, but if they aren't, they're doing a really good job by accident. If you look back at the Vietnam War, that was another really expensive, totally pointless invasion and killed millions of people, and that really bankrupted the U.S. government at that time. That's why they had to take the gold backing away from the dollar in 1971, because they just couldn't afford to keep it at that level anymore, because they had inflated the currency so much during that time and printed so much money to fund these wars. And I think that's what's been going on for the last 10 years. Look at Iraq and Afghanistan. I don't really call them wars because there is no second army involved. It's mostly an occupation, but it's incredibly expensive. And the U.S. government spends more than the entire rest of the world combined on military. And it costs trillions of dollars a year to run the Department of Defense. And that's definitely one of the main reasons that the U.S. government will soon be in a state of collapse.
Yes, I agree. I love the way you say the Department of Offense, because that is definitely what it is. There's no defense involved. And it's amazing how the media has fallen right in place hand in glove with the governmental programs. And every time we hear about all these anonymous suicide bombers and these names pop up of people you never heard of, and they're a huge danger to this, one or two individuals seem to justify all this military might and expense that's going on in all parts of the world, and it's just building and building and building. Do you find that you're meeting enough people who are aware of this?
Oh, definitely. In the circles that I run in, everyone's anarchist, open-minded. They're aware of what's going on, and nobody likes war, of course. They don't even like the government. And so, yeah, and I think it's catching on. I think people are starting to learn that the last place where people are catching on, unfortunately, is the U.S., where they've had decades and decades of war propaganda and schooling. And you look at things like the Super Bowl. I couldn't even watch the opening ceremony with all the military and everyone standing and cheering, and they put on their people from Camp Freedom in Afghanistan, and everyone cheers. It's really, it's the propaganda is unbelievable for a war state, and there's never been a larger war state, of course, than the U.S. right now.
Yes, exactly. And the odd thing is, I'm speaking from Europe. I can say that there has never been a more pro-American attitude that I have seen in Europe. People are waving American flags, wearing them, and I do wonder how it is that there seems to be a lack of consciousness in Europe as well as to what is really going on. A little bit more consciousness than in the States, but still a lot of pro-Americanism here, and very little conversation about what may be going on, except for the economic crisis. Now, the economic crisis that we're seeing in Europe is severe in Greece and in Spain. Give the audience an idea of what you suggest to avoid suffering from the coming economic collapse of the dollar.
Sure, yeah, that's why I started the newsletter, The Dollar Vigilante, and the whole theme of the Dollar Vigilante is surviving and prospering during and after the coming dollar collapse. And because the dollar is the reserve currency of the world, most currencies are tied to it, and most currencies are also inflating along with it. I think it's going to be a global fiat currency collapse. And so the things some of the things, obviously there's many things, is to get some of your assets outside of your home country if you live in the West, because as those governments continue to collapse, they'll continue to take more and more of your assets. There's talk about nationalizing IRAs in the U.S. now. They've already done that in some parts of Europe. They've done it in Italy. To some extent, they've done it in Ireland. So you need to get your money outside of any government system, and many ways to do that is just to buy hard assets, whether it be foreign real estate in a place like Galt's Gulch, or get precious metals, and there's so many easy ways to internationalize your precious metals as well. We wrote a report called Getting Your Gold Out of Dodge, and that's just goldoutofdodge.com, and it lists, it's about 80 pages on how to internationalize your precious metals to make it much harder for them to become confiscated or taken at some point.
So, in your opinion, gold is an excellent investment, an excellent way to avoid losing your assets in the coming collapse.
Yes, absolutely. Almost any hard asset, anything that Ben Bernanke can't counterfeit, is a good thing to own right now. Ben Bernanke is the biggest destroyer of wealth probably in human history. And he has no plans to stop. In fact, he has plans to increase. And they actually really can't stop now. This system is in collapse. It's been in collapse starting in 1913 with the founding of the Federal Reserve, a central bank. In capitalism, you don't have central banks. That's actually a tenet of communism. So that started the slow downward cycle. And then in 1971, when they took any gold backing away from the dollar, which actually put the entire world on a fiat system, that was the final nail in the coffin. And since then, it's all been baked in the cake with these sort of socialist governments today, that they're just going to print and print money until all the currencies become worthless.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that the euro is in on that as well. And people have seen an increase in prices or the cost of living since the euro has been put into place and local currencies have been taken out. And we're now seeing a return toward local currencies, but it's a bit weak and it's difficult for people to do. But they do understand that they're being kind of roped in and herded into a certain corner so that they can be then attacked and their wealth taken from them. So I think there is a consciousness about this. What do you think about silver?
Just like gold, I like silver as well. Of course, silver is a little bit more difficult to have in large amounts because it's much cheaper, and so to have $1 million worth of silver is, it'll fill up half your living room, whereas $1 million worth of gold isn't too big. I think they're both good. I definitely own both.
Okay. And now I see you have the website dollarvigilante.com, and it's you have several people here: Jim Carter, Redmond Weisenberg, Gary Gibson. Tell me about the group you have here in the Dollar Vigilante.
Yeah, I started writing it just by myself about 3 years ago, but there's so many things to write about nowadays. When I first started around 2009, I thought, what am I going to write about every day? There wasn't that many things, but now there's 10, 20 things every day that should be talked about that I just don't even have time. So I've brought on quite a few more people. And our enterprises have all been growing, so we've been able to expand, and now I have a great group of people. They're all anarchists. Redmond Weisenberger is the founder of Ludwig von Mises Institute of Canada. Gary Gibson came, so he's an Austrian economics expert, and Gary Gibson came from Whiskey and Gunpowder newsletter, which was already basically an anarchist newsletter, and that was part of the Agora newsletter company, and we took him away from there. We also have people like Wendy McElroy, who's a longtime libertarian, female libertarian who's really been pounding the drum on this stuff for decades. She was way ahead of her time, so she writes for us now. So we've got a great group, and Jim Carter, he's a American lawyer who expatriated to Mexico a number of years ago, and he understands what's going on, and he of course is an anarchist. So we've got quite the a crew of anarchists.
Great. And so would everyone in your group consider themselves anarchists and anarcho-capitalists? Would you say that?
Yeah, I wouldn't talk to them otherwise.
Oh, that's good. Jeff, why did you pick Acapulco, Mexico to live in?
Well, it just sort of happened naturally. I was trying to sail around the world on my sailboat, and I went all the way through Mexico, and I stopped at many places, and the one place that I just found was right for me was Acapulco, and one of the reasons I liked it was it's not really touristy like Cancun or Cabo. I wanted to live in more Mexican culture, which I enjoy, and I went on to sail around, all the way down to El Salvador and sank my boat there. And then I just traveled the world for about 4 years. And at the end of it, I was pretty exhausted. I went to almost 100 countries, and I had been living out of a backpack the entire time. And I said to myself, okay, I need to go live somewhere for a while and get healthy again and have like my own bed and things like that. And I just thought about it, and I had been living in Thailand at the time, but I'd been living there for about a year, and I was looking for something new. So I thought I should go back to Acapulco. I really liked it. And then I met an Acapulco girl here and got married, so I'm kind of stuck here now, but I don't mind being stuck here at all.
That sounds good to me. I mean, Acapulco's a beautiful place. I've been there, and I know it's a growing place as well. It started off as a tiny fishing village, but I think it's much more than that right now.
Yeah, not many people realize it's a 500-year-old city. It was actually one of the first, it was the site of the first global free trade about 400 years ago. The Spanish galleons would go from here to Manila, Philippines twice a year. And so this is an old city with a lot of culture and very interesting and beautiful at the same time. So those are some of the things I like about it.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the culture of Mexico is incredibly rich and colorful and vibrant and full of so much that people have not yet discovered in general, like tourists and things like that. It's a particularly artistic culture, I think. What is it that pleases you the most about living in Mexico, Jeff?
Oh, definitely. I've been to about 100 countries, and I enjoyed most of them. But the two cultures that I really loved the most, that were the most friendly, laid back, funny, interesting, was Thailand and Mexico. So that's why I chose to live in Thailand for a while, and then now in Mexico. And yeah, I really love the culture. It's very laid back. There's not a lot of political stuff. No one really even cares about the government. They just look at them like a nuisance. And yeah, it's a great lifestyle.
That's interesting you say that. I think at the border, though, near Texas, they might care a little more about what's going on with the American government. I know that a lot of people are having problems with the quote-unquote drug war and the running of guns by the CIA into Mexico to quote-unquote fight drug runners. None of that is affecting you, people in Acapulco?
Well, Mexico is a giant country. Not many people realize it. And of course, there's good areas and bad areas. You can look at a place like Chicago. 50 people get shot in Chicago every weekend. But not many people talk about Chicago. Oh, that's a dangerous place. It's just you just don't go to the south side. And you can live that way in many places. There's many places I know people in Tijuana who live in the very rich areas, and it's beautiful. And if you get in some other areas, it's not that great. The same thing here.
Oh, we're having a sound problem.
Oh. Can you hear me now?
A little bit.
Something was in the background.
Birds?
Like a buzz.
Okay.
Oh.
Okay. It sounded like a huge bumblebee.
Oh, is it gone now?
Okay, it's okay now. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
No, I agree with you there. It's just that the what I'm trying to do is for our audience. I think a lot of Americans see the problems with the Mexican border. It's always in the news and everything else. They don't realize what an enormous country lies beyond it, and they tend to concentrate on the border. So it's a refreshing attitude to hear about someone talk about how the government isn't much in the people's minds in a place like Acapulco.
Yeah, the big thing is that
the
big thing is there is problems in Mexico, and it's all caused by the U.S. government with their insane war on drugs. And it is sad. And of course, like you just mentioned, they're gun running guns into Mexico and giving them to people in the drug cartels, and they end up using them. And so the U.S. government, in some ways, I believe, is trying to destabilize Mexico. Mexico is a very free country in general, and the U.S. isn't. And I think they're trying to keep most of their U.S. subjects from going there, because when you come here, you realize, oh, I thought I lived in the land of the free, and you know, you can do whatever you want here, basically. There's no real laws about anything. I drive on my scooter with no license plate, no helmet, drunk, listening to my headphones. You know, you can do you know, stuff like that. And so I think to some extent the U.S. government is trying to paint a picture of Mexico as being a terrible place, and trying to keep most U.S. citizens inside their own country so they don't realize just how bad it is getting there.
You remind me of Jesse Ventura, because he lives in Mexico also, and he says, you know, if we build a wall, it might be to keep us in. Have you ever heard that, Jeff? Oh,
I've said that many times. I said at some point they're going to turn those cameras around, and I really believe that as they start to institute capital controls, the U.S. dollar is going to collapse, and the U.S. government in some ways is going to collapse as well. And you can see with the Department of Homeland Insecurity now buying 1.4 billion hollow point rounds. There's tanks. They're buying tanks all over the place. I'm not sure. I don't know exactly about these FEMA camps, but it sounds like they're setting up empty prisons all over the place. It's going to get very interesting in the next few years.
Yeah, interesting is putting it mildly. Yeah, we're seeing a lot of people, luckily with the media and the internet and people who have cell phones, we're able to see a little bit at the tip of the iceberg, I think. But apparently there are massive complexes being built around the United States that are heavily guarded and difficult to photograph and difficult to access. And you have to wonder why they're being built. Do you feel that there's possibly the government is planning for massive imprisonment of its own citizens?
Oh, absolutely. It already is doing it. If you look at the U.S. In the prisons, there's more. You know, they have the U.S. has 5% of the world population, has 25% of the prison population. You look at the amount of blacks in prison, it's almost a form of apartheid, and most of them are victimless crimes, drug crimes. They got caught with some marijuana, which is a wonderful little plant. And yeah, they've already been doing that, and I think they're just ramping it up. You see all the things that people are getting arrested for nowadays. It's just absolutely insane for photographing a police officer or almost anything. You see people with gardens getting, SWAT teams come in, and people collecting rainwater are being put in jail on their own properties. It's already almost a police state, and it's definitely looks like it's going to get even worse.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's kind of insane. It's gotten to the point where I have started to question: do we need any laws at all? Why do we need laws? I'm starting to see any law as being oppressive because the laws have become so ridiculous now. I feel that people are people, and that they understand what's right and wrong, and we can survive quite well without having quote-unquote laws, and then law enforcement. And it's just gone to an extreme right now, I think, in the States, although I haven't been there for about 5 years, so I can't really say. Well, Mary Lou can tell us more. Yeah.
Well, we can have laws, but we don't need them done by the government and using force over people to do them. We can have natural law or private law. These things can work very well, but they're not allowed because the U.S. or all governments have a monopoly on law, on violence, on police. Down here, no one would ever call the police for anything. If anything, if you have some money, just have a bodyguard or a private security guy, and there'd be so much opportunity in a free market. And this isn't a free market either, but it's much better, where you could have just private security. You never hear about private security, what do they call that, brutality. You never hear about that because they actually have someone to answer to, and if they don't do a good job, they get fired. So everything about government is actually centrally planned, and it's basically communist style. And most people in the U.S. today understand that communism doesn't work, but most things the government does is communist style. It's centrally planned, they have a monopoly, and they take your money by force against your will, and they use it for whatever they want, and you can't fire them. And that's the main root of the problem.
Absolutely, yeah. We're going to take a quick commercial break, Jeff. We'll be right back. This is Gadsen Rising. I'm Libby Gadsen, and with Mary Lou Van Houten, our co-host and producer. We'll be right back.
We're back.
Well, thanks, Mary Lou, and I'm Libby Gadsen. Welcome to Gadsen Rising, everybody. We're talking to Jeff Berwick, and we're talking about a lot of subjects to do with the current situation all over the world, in particular economics and regarding the coming collapse of the dollar. And Jeff and I were just having an interesting chat about drug laws, and I am living in Spain right now, where cannabis is practically legal, and in order to obtain it, you just have to sign a form saying you're an addict and you can join a club and get all you want. And so I was just about to ask Jeff, what is it like in Mexico? Are there any restrictions on growing it? Is it something that you're able to access easily, or do you have to go through hoops?
Yeah, I think it's funny that you have to sign a form saying you're an addict, considering marijuana is not addictive, but...
Yeah. Oh, I think it's hilarious. Yeah. But at least you have access, yeah.
Yeah. Well, you have access anywhere. You have access. Anyone who wants marijuana in the U.S. can get it. It's just more dangerous to get it. You might get kidnapped and put in a cage.
That's what I mean.
Yeah. Here in Mexico, not many people know this, all drugs are actually legal to have. So you can have any drug you want on you personally, but you can't sell it, and you can't traffic large amounts. Yeah.
Wonder how you buy it. Then.
Yeah, that's the tricky part.
Well, yeah, that's called a conundrum, I think. Well, I think I hear in Spain at least. People can. It's pretty easy to have access, but it's a very strange situation when you walk into, which I have. You walk into a cannabis club. It's so incredibly laid back. There's no type of attitude, and the variety of people that you see in these places is amazing. You may see a very middle-class couple playing chess, next to a guy with Rasta locks, what people consider your quote-unquote typical marijuana user. And then you might see an old couple, hanging out, and it's just an incredible variety of people. And there's no sense of any tension between them at all. They all seem to be in some sort of same wavelength without giving up their identity.
Yeah,
it's an interesting concept.
Yeah, marijuana is
Go ahead,
marijuana is a wonderful, wonderful plant, and it actually cures a lot of things. It can cure cancer. By smoking it, there's no known record of anyone getting lung cancer from smoking it. You look, there's so many worse drugs on earth than marijuana, including alcohol and cigarettes. But of course, the governments don't really want everyone to have access to marijuana because for a number of reasons. For one, they become slightly less productive because they're kind of chilled out and they don't really want to do too much, and they don't want that. And secondly, I
always said work is a four-letter word.
And it also expands your mind, whereas alcohol is more of a dumbing substance. It kind of just dumbs you down a little bit, just sort of makes you, you don't think more on alcohol, you think less, and they like that as well. Whereas marijuana makes you think a little bit outside of your own headspace, and once you start to think about that, you start to realize how the government is not good, and things like that. So that's one of the main reasons, and plus also the pharmaceutical industry. Marijuana can really cure so many things that they prescribe really toxic chemicals for. If people would just smoke marijuana, if you're in cancer treatment, all those kind of things. That's why they've allowed some medicinal marijuana, they call it now. But this is an absolutely wonderful substance, and it's really crazy that it's outlawed and that people have to get kidnapped and thrown in cages over this, and of course, by it being underground as well, just like during alcohol prohibition. You look at the Chicago in the 1930s, it was headless bodies in the street every day, and that's because it was driven underground. And when it's driven underground, there is no really easy dispute resolution. Whereas if you have a alcohol company, and of course that's how many people in the US got rich, was running alcohol back in those days, same as some of the Mexican guys are getting very rich now.
Sure.
And but they can't have a dispute resolution. You can't sue somebody if they didn't provide the product that you wanted, and it becomes more violence-based. And then, of course, the government says, well, you see, we've made drugs illegal, and now there's some violence, and so now you need government to protect you from all this violence. Government is a self-licking ice cream cone.
Like problem solution.
Oh, totally. That's what government always does.
Yeah. I'm starting to understand how incredibly violent government is. I think the success of the state is proven in how people consider the state to be peaceful and anarchy to be violent, whereas nothing but the reverse could be true. And this is what part of the message that we're constantly trying to get out is that people understand how innately violent governments are, because in order to survive, they must be. And so this is one of the reasons I think all three of us consider ourselves anarchists in some way. Would you agree with that, Jeff, that that government is innately violent?
Oh, of course. That's what government is. Government is force, and that's all it is. And most people have been brainwashed out of seeing that. I get some people saying to me sometimes, they'll say, I hear Mexico's dangerous. I heard that maybe it's possible I could get robbed if I go to certain places. And I always say to them, well, you're being robbed for 50% of your income every single year at home, arm robbed. If you don't pay, you're going to have people with guns at your door. But they don't seem to see that as being robbery. And that's, it starts with the public indoctrination centers, the schools. 12 years of indoctrination about how the state is great, how we wouldn't be able to survive without the state, and people really, those are your formative years, and people are giving their kids to the government to train them. And Vladimir Lenin said, give me your child for 4 years and the seed I plant will never get uprooted. And now they have them for 12 years or 16 years if they go to college. And it's all, a lot of the elementary schools are standing for their Pledge of Allegiance with the president's picture on the wall. This is all a form of brainwashing.
Absolutely. One of the questions I don't have children, so I don't know, and I don't live in the States. I do wonder what the schools are teaching children about 9/11. Do you know, Mary Lou or Jeff, or because I'd really be curious what the students are learning in school when it comes to 9/11. If they have a teacher who happens to have another conspiracy theory besides the official government conspiracy theory, if the teacher gets disciplined or what happens, It's just idle curiosity. It's just one of those things I think about once in a while. I don't know. Do you have kids, Jeff?
Yeah, I do. I have two. We mostly unschool them, which, if you don't know what that means, we basically, it's a form of peaceful parenting. We don't force them to do anything, and a lot of people say, well, that they're just going to sit around and play video games all day, and it's like, well, that's fine if that's what they want to do. But most children are incredibly curious, and they want to know everything. And it's actually the school systems that take that curiosity out of them. There was a study done, and they asked every grade level how curious they felt they were. And at grade 1, it was like 90% said, I'm 90% curious. It goes down every year until when they finally get out with their badge of obedience, high school diploma, 12 years later, they're almost completely not curious because they've been forced to sit in these chairs and mostly learn completely unimportant things, or in many things are false. History classes teach that in the 1930s that the way they got out of the Depression was thanks to Roosevelt, and World War II got it out of the Depression. Of course, the Depression was actually caused by the central bank and the government itself. So once again, the government creates a problem and then says they came and solved it. It's sort of like what Harry Brown said. The government is basically comes up and breaks both your legs and hands you a crutch and says, I'm here to help you.
I like that quote.
Yeah, it's true. And one of the things that I found horrible in school was that I had to memorize dates of war for history class. And I kept saying, why do I have to memorize these dates? Isn't there other histories besides wars? It seemed like that's all the history I was taught for 12 years was the history of war. And now I know why, of course. But of course, in those days I didn't. And it's very onerous what they do. They really do squeeze the curiosity out of people, and it's intentional. Tell me what your kids are most curious about, Jeff. Do you find that each one is differently oriented, or do they have more or less the same interests?
Oh, they're very different. One's a boy and one's a girl. 8-year-old boy, 6-year-old girl, and the little girl is your typical little girl. She just loves to talk, and she's so interested in relationships, and she knows who's who and who's boyfriends with this, and she's so interested in that. Whereas my son is a fairly typical boy. He has no interest in that. He wants to get on the computer. He wants to get into video games. He wants to watch movies, fantasy movies that are with swords and aliens and all kinds of interesting stuff. Whereas my little daughter doesn't have any interest in that. She'd rather just sit there and talk to whoever's in the house about whatever's on her mind at that moment in time. But yeah, they're very interesting. I don't put them, I ask them if they want to go. But of course, they're very interested. My son just asked me if he could go learn to swimming school. My daughter is very interested in Kung Fu. She's 6 years old. She's very good at it. And just the other day, it was that UFC fight. It was the first female world championship. And I showed it to her, and because she hasn't seen Kung Fu that way before, she's just seen hitting the pads and stuff. And her eyes just opened wide, and she's like, "That's Kung Fu, Daddy?" And I said, "Yeah." And she was just like, "Wow." She was just really into it. And, the kids are interested in so many things, and all you have to do is sort of find what they're interested in and help them with it. For example, I interviewed someone recently about unschooling, Dana Martin, and her son was into this one particular video game. I think it's called Runecraft or something like that. And he was so into it. So she flew with him to Las Vegas to some gaming show to meet the person who created the game. And so these are the kinds of things that you can do to really help your children with whatever they're interested in. And video games aren't necessarily bad. They're actually quite good. I grew up on video games. put into this environment. You have to learn how to win. You have to learn oftentimes how to interact with other people in the game to win the game. It's very technical, strategic. You also learn all kinds of other things, including hand-eye coordination and stuff like that. I'd much rather my son played video games all day than put him in a public school where he's going to have to do the Pledge of Allegiance, learn about all these wars, be forced to learn things, or not, you don't really learn, but forced to memorize things just so he can pass a test that he has no interest in, which of course will just make him less interested in learning.
Yeah, it's and if you were to see the future for your children, what would you like to see them become most involved with? Is there anything that you, I mean, as a parent, you should, I don't think you can escape the emotions of desiring to see certain things in your children. Do you feel that is there something, there's a way you'd like to see them evolve in any particular way?
I would just be the most proud if they were open-minded, always trying to learn, if they're passionate about whatever they do, whatever that is, that they're free thinkers. And of course, is one interesting story I have is I was driving with about 6 people in my car here in Mexico, and it was the day after the federal election, and my son heard over the radio that there was an election, and none of us even knew who had won, or nor did we really care. And so someone said, well, who is the new president of Mexico? And my son turns around and he goes, president? We don't need no president. So
that reminds me of, we don't need no stinking badges.
Oh, and when we drive by the police officers with their guns and stuff, he puts his finger out like he has a gun, and he like play fights with them, like he thinks they're kind of ridiculous.
Well, now in the United States, he could get in trouble for that.
Yeah.
Y'all heard about that?
I was going to say that's dangerous. Yeah.
Did you hear about the kid who
something you don't do there?
Did you hear about the little kid in the U.S. who formed his Pop-Tart into a very crude shape of a gun, and they called 9/11 SWAT team? He was in handcuffs. It was a Pop-Tart.
Yeah. And I saw a thing on Facebook where someone made a machine gun out of a Pop-Tart. Like, well, they should have next time go all out. You know?
Those things will kill you to eat them, though.
Yeah.
Terrible. Just eat them and you'll die. I just remember them from my childhood. Yeah, I think one of the things that if I had children, I'd like to see them become artists. I think that the creative mind is something that's the first thing that's squelched when children go into school, and that's their sense of creativity and their sense of imagination, and those people who survive the system and go on to become great artists, I think, have an incredible fortitude.
Oh yeah, like most of the creative people, most of the people who have created most of the great things in our lives, and most of them didn't go to traditional schools. You look at people like Aristotle or Leonardo da Vinci. These are how people were able to think when they weren't indoctrinated into this one style of learning, which doesn't really work in the first place. And it also takes away your ability to want to do other things. They used to call it the Renaissance man. So you could do so many different things, whereas today, if you look at most Western schools, very early on they say, what's the career you want to do? And the person will say mechanic, and they'll be like, okay, that's what you're going to be. And this is takes away a lot of creativity. You look at most of the people who've created amazing things in our lifetimes, people like Steve Jobs with Apple. I think he dropped out of high school, and he never went to college. And it was actually funny, one of the best college, what do they call that when you graduate? There's a speech.
Commencement?
Yeah, whatever that is. Yeah, he did one at some college in California, and it was really interesting because he was basically saying that they wasted their time, and it was great. It's actually one of the best speeches I've ever seen. If you can YouTube it, it's really good.
Yeah. It is amazing what the things that people created, Da Vinci and the philosophers, the thoughts and the imaginations they had, which have come to become the base for our culture today. If we were allowed to continue to think freely. It's mind-boggling where we could go. Enough people have done so, but they've been squelched. For example, there are people, you have Nikola Tesla, who was able to create incredible theories of energy. And he said energy is everywhere. You just have to reach out and get it. It's around us. It's in us. It's everywhere. We don't need oil. We don't need all these other contraptions that we created to quote unquote make energy. So I think that it's very but we don't hear a lot about those people. We hear more about people who are digging for oil.
Yeah, and politicians and people like that.
What did you take? Yeah. What did you take on energy and using the products of the planet, such as? Do you feel like, for example, in Gulf Gulch, do you have a certain attitude about how to use energy and how to create it?
Yeah, we're going to try to create all our own energy through hydroelectric and solar. We want to basically not be attached too much to the grid. There's going to be a lot of changes in the next few years, and you don't know what's going to happen. So yeah, I'm very open, and we've got some people who are really into this stuff. I'm not personally, I don't know too much about how it all works, but yeah, there's so many fascinating things coming out, and of course many of them are being hindered or even stopped by regulation, things like patents. Patents are one of the most, government patents. It's a copyright on an idea. This really slows down our growth of actually technology, because you can't really even take someone's idea and build upon it anymore, which of course was the major basis upon doing anything for thousands of years. And now if you try to do anything, I just saw Apple sued Samsung again because, they took one of their ideas, and, this really stifles technology. I think without the government, without taxes, without regulation, without patents, without IP, we'd already be in spaceships, personal spaceships, really.
And Steve Jobs took other people's ideas. So that's kind of ironic that Apple's now suing, What do you think about that?
No, it's terrible. I think if Steve Jobs was still around, I don't think he'd support it. But of course, his company is now much bigger than him. He has shareholders, and it's all. Once you have these systems in place, it kind of corrupts everybody. Because I'll give you one example. If I start a company and I invent some product, and I don't believe in the patent system at all, but I would almost have to go and patent it, because if I didn't, someone else would, and then they would take it away from me by force. So this is how the state and all of their systems corrupts everything, is by having this giant monopoly on force, and then you have to play part of their game or else you get hurt.
Yeah, exactly. It's this whole oil system has gone so wrong, because not only is it the whole idea is destructive in taking it out of the ground, and it's so the energy that we use to get it, it's ridiculous. But then the fact that we're having these quote unquote oil spills in the Gulf of Mexico, for example, that are unstoppable. This spill that we had underneath the water in the Gulf of Mexico is still going on. You don't hear much about it. Do you hear anything about it in Mexico?
Not too much, but again, that was all caused by the government, who wouldn't allow the oil companies to drill within a certain proximity of the coast, so they had to go out deeper and deeper. So again, it's a government-caused problem for the most part. You look at all the kickbacks that went to BP from the government. They were supposed to actually pay for it, but through this fascist system, the big companies always get taken care of. So yeah, it's a terrible system, and I don't know exactly what's going on in the Gulf of Mexico right now, but yeah, it's just terrible that a lot of that was caused by, again, the government.
Yeah, and it's and then the alternative systems. Now, I've heard that you can actually run a car on water. I don't know if that's true or not, but the alternative systems have been either quote unquote outlawed or simply put out of business through by overwhelming administrative demands and costs, and so small companies can't start up. What do you think about, for example, alternative medicines like homeopathic medicines and versus big pharma? What is your feelings about that, Jeff?
Well, before I mention that, on the energy part, Foster Gamble, who did the Thrive movie, he's a huge lover of any alternative energy, and I know him personally. He's part of the Procter & Gamble Fortune company. And what he does is he hears about breakthroughs every now and then about how someone has run a car on water and things like that. And he literally flies there as fast as he can to get that information, because he knows the government will be there any second and shut it down, because the government's all tied in with the oil companies. It's all part of the same thing. That's what fascism is, and that's what the U.S. for the most part is. And it's just terrible how they... and through patents and all sorts of things, they just shut down all kinds of ingenuity. Speaking about medicine, I've always been of the, I don't know why, but I've never really taken medicine, like actual chemical medicine. I've always just taken, unless I absolutely have to, an antibiotic, for example. But I've never really taken much medicine, and I see people who do, and they just get worse and worse over time. The entire Western medical system is just absolutely insane. They treat the symptom, they don't treat the problem. Whereas in a place like Thailand or something, if you went to a doctor and you said, I have this problem, they wouldn't just give you a pill for it for the most part. They'll say, well, let's find out what's causing that. And usually it's just something to do with diet or exercise, very basic things. And most people, and of course there's a whole world of homeopathic medicines that are excellent. I live here in Mexico, and I laugh because if I ever have some sort of problem, I'll have a skin problem or something, I'll say to my wife, maybe I should go to the doctor. And she'll go, no, just eat avocados. And I'll eat avocados and I'll be fine. There's still a lot of that in Mexico, where they still look to food as being the source of health, and definitely not medicine, although that's changing over time as well.
It's very insidious. What the big pharma is doing is they're not just treating the symptoms; they're actually creating, making the problems worse in many cases. I think, for example, in acid reflux, these medications are making people sicker, whereas acid reflux can be cured very simply, often by just taking a teaspoon of cider vinegar a day with some water. Which blows people's minds away. They're like, it's not possible. It's like, yeah, it is possible, and that's because it's a pH imbalance in your system. So you just need a little more, and what acid cider vinegar does, it just balances the pH balance in your body, and that's what most stomach ailments are about. And it's just a food, like you said. It's just eating the right foods and the right combination of foods. Do you find the doctors in Mexico tend to talk about this also, or are they locked into the system of big pharma?
It's getting worse and worse. I went to a doctor a year ago, and I walked out with a prescription for 10 different chemicals, and I just went on Google and I looked them all up, and basically Google told me that most of them are useless or actually make things worse. And then I looked on Google again for a more natural way, and I found a natural, I forget what it was just eat something different. And another really funny part is I've heard that up to 1 in 4 women in the U.S. are on antidepressant chemical drugs, highly toxic drugs like Prozac.
Oh, no.
And of course, again, almost every school shooting that's happened in the last 30 years, every single one of them has been on either Prozac or Adderall or all kinds of those chemicals. And that's never brought up. They always bring up that it's the guns that are the problem. And then the government says, now we have to take away people's guns. So once again, they do all those things. And probably the funniest part is Prozac, which is supposed to be an antidepressant. One of the major side effects of it is suicidal tendencies.
Oh, great.
And people take this stuff. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, it's true. It's and the other thing too is that they found that many times the drugs that people are taking create exactly what they're trying to avoid, and then they're doing combinations of drugs, and people are dying in mysterious deaths because the doctors themselves don't have the time to investigate how the drugs interact. And in Europe here, what we're having now is a suppression of the homeopathic system by not compensating them through the state system anymore. They used to. Only about 10 years ago, when I lived in France, they used to pay homeopathic doctors to treat you homeopathically, whether it was acupuncture or whether it was through using plants. Now, slowly, the European Union is saying, well, we can't all agree on it, so we're just not going to pay these homeopathic physicians anymore. We're only going to pay the guys that use the big pharma products. So I have to say it's getting to be that way also here. So you're finding that the Mexican doctors are also becoming willing to prescribing. Is that correct, Jeff?
Yeah, a lot of the world's turning that way. Many of them train in American-style medical schools where they're taught that they just have to prescribe certain chemicals for certain things, and yeah, it's all turning that way. Of course, you can still find other options, and actually, there's many ways to not get cancer in the first place. But secondly, there's been many discoveries of how to cure cancer, and they've all been made illegal in the U.S. And many of those people, including one person, I forget his name, Brzezinski or something, he went down to Mexico, I believe, and started up his own cancer curing clinic because he's allowed to do it here, but he wasn't allowed to do it in the U.S.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. You can be thrown in jail for offering alternative treatments to cancer in the USA, and a lot of it's pretty simple stuff. It's not that complex.
Yeah, you look at the food system as well. Things like raw milk.
Yeah.
Raw milk, of course, is very healthy. Mm-hmm. The pasteurized milk, they basically irradiate it and kill all the good nutrients you would get out of it. And you look at what the U.S. government's doing to raw milk companies nowadays. They come in with SWAT teams. Mm-hmm. It really makes you wonder if they're just trying to kill everybody there. I'm not sure what's going on.
I know. It's like they're blatant about it.
Yeah, no, I think they're quite blatant about it myself. So we're going to, I'm sorry, Jeff, I forgot to take our commercial break. We're going to take a little commercial break. This is Gadsen Rising. I'm Libby Gadsen with Jeff Berwick and Mary Van Houten, our co-host and producer. We'll be right back.
Get ready for the epic news.
Hey, Jeff. It's been a great program so far. I've enjoyed it. I totally forgot about the commercial break from Mary that reminded me.
No problem.
It's been great having you on. Hope maybe you can come back again because we can talk about a lot more things. And we're just trying to get the word out to people as much as we can about all the alternatives that they have. Is there anything that you feel that you'd like to go into before? We're only going to have about 20 minutes left.
Like I said, not anything off the top of my head. I can talk about almost anything. There's so many things to talk about with what's going on. It's pretty easy.
Yeah, I know. I think right now we're coming to a boiling point. There's so many things going on. It's just everywhere you look, if you have any kind of awareness. Have you ever seen the movie by John Carpenter, They Live?
Which one?
It's called They Live. It's a funny movie. It's John Carpenter. Take a look at it sometime. I think you'd have a lot of fun watching it. It's basically it's about our society as it is right now and how people are just hypnotized by all the mess, the billboards and the televisions, and then but then this guy finds magic sunglasses and he puts on the sunglasses and he starts to see the world that really is. And he sees that the billboard is saying obey and have sex and take drugs. Or, he starts to see, and then he starts to see that there's actually aliens in the world who are controlling the world. And it's a hilarious movie. It's John Carpenter. So
I actually have seen clips of that on YouTube. Yeah, it looks pretty good.
Yeah, well, the whole movie it's hilarious. It just kind of makes you laugh when you watch it. And I think we're kind of living in that kind of, a lot of us are putting on the sunglasses and going, oh, whoa. Because it starts to get pretty obvious, I think, after a while.
Yeah, it does.
Like Mary was saying, they're getting blatant about it.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah. So I don't know. I've just moved to Spain here, and I'll see how I like it here. You do have quite a police state here, but I don't, I may end up in Chile, who knows? But I'm getting leery of investing in property in quote-unquote civilized countries because they tend to take away your property rights via taxes and insurance and all that.
Yeah.
So I'm getting leery. And my last property I had was in France, and it was just a little bit scary sometimes when I saw they tend to control you through utilities, not taxes. The taxes are quite low. It's for utilities that will eat you alive in France. So it's so yeah, I'm looking for alternative ways to invest. So I put a friend request. My real name is Marlene O'Neill, and I just started with the Gadsen 5 years ago as a way to express myself without making everybody I knew mad at me. So, and she just started gaining a lot of fans, and Libby Gadsen now has over 6,000 friends and fans and followers.
That's great.
So that's why I kept the name Libby Gadsen.
You're listening to Freedomizer Radio at freedomizerradio.com. Join us in the chat room. You can also listen and participate by calling 347-324-3704. Like Freedomizer Radio on Facebook, and follow Libby Gadsen on Facebook. We're back.
Well, thanks, Mary Lou. And I just want to tell our audience about a couple of Jeff's websites. For example, there's Anarchast.com, and that's ANARCHAST.com. I wrote it the wrong way with an I before, and I was like, this doesn't look right. So it's Anarchast. And it was a very interesting website, and that's where I got the impression you might be an anarcho-communist, because it said topics include anarcho-communism on an interview that you did.
Oh, okay.
Do you have a particular viewpoint about anarcho-communism?
Oh, do I?
Oh, okay. Well, let her rip. Tell us.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it really exists. I think the whole... If you just took off the word anarcho in front of communist, you wouldn't change any way that these people are. They're basically just communists. They've latched on to the word anarchy because it sort of started hundreds of years ago, that word, and it was more tied to leftist type stuff. But now the word, well, first of all, the word anarchy means an. It's an old Greek word, an, which means without, and archy, which means a ruler.
Right.
And so I guess their concept is that they don't want a ruler who isn't communist, which doesn't really fit. Whereas anarcho-capitalists, what our belief is that you just don't initiate force and you don't make people do things that they don't want to do. So in a truly anarchic world, and I think anarchy and anarcho-capitalism are the exact same thing, in a true anarchy world, you could have communism. If you want some people, if people who are living in a certain area, they all really like communism and they want their own little communist commune, they can do that. Whereas in anarcho-communism, if I want to have private property and I want to own my computer, they'll just come and take it away. It has to be part of the collective. So they really don't even exist, and I wish they would stop using the word because it's starting to get irritating.
Well, isn't the word for that, it's an oxymoron, right? The two words just can't exist side by side, really.
That's right.
Now, and tell me about women in the anarchist movement.
Living in it?
Women.
Oh, women.
That's another topic, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, I actually just, on Anarchast, we just went through our Young, Beautiful Female Anarchist Month. And the reason I did that was because I kept hearing from younger anarchist guys that there weren't many anarchist girls around. And I said, really? Because I see them all over the place. So I had about almost 10 on in a row. And the thing that I think about females in the anarchist community is that we're all run off genetics, and there's many things that we do that are just inbred in us that are different about men and women for the most part. Men have been genetically bred for thousands or tens or hundreds of thousands of years to want to spread their seed, to get their genes into the next generation, whereas women have been more bred, or genetics are instilled in them, that they don't want to do that as much. They'd rather keep one man, preferably a strong or a well-off person who can take care of the child, because they have to take care of those kids for a long period of time until they mature. And so because of that, it's my thinking that many women who are anarchists aren't really out there. They're not rocking the boat too much. So far, they're starting to do more now, and I think that's just because of a genetic instinct that you don't want to cause a lot of chaos around you, because you have to raise this kid for a certain amount of years. So if you look back at tribes, for example, if you had a tribe of 50 people and 2 people had a totally different idea, for the most part, the rest of the tribe will just kill them. So it's very dangerous to have different ideas in a society. And of course, women are more attuned to society. They tend to care more about what other people think of them. So I think those sort of things is part of the reason that we haven't seen as many anarchist women as anarchist men that are more outwardly out there. But I believe they're out there. They just haven't come out and said it quite as much for those reasons.
Oh, I find that very interesting, Jeff, because here you are on the show with 2 women anarchists, and we're both childless. We need one of our children. Were you thinking that too, Mary Lou?
That might explain it.
Yeah, I guess we just couldn't fit. We needed to choose mold, and I guess we chose anarchy over children. Terrible, but it's not the conventional, I guess. It's a similar thing, I think. Women are tended to think on a more local basis, and for that reason, I think it would be great if we ruled the world, because they tend not to centralize; they tend to localize, and this is something that has been lost in the way that governments have developed in our society, or quote unquote civilization has developed. It's by centralizing everything, and that's I think a very male thing. Do you think so, Jeff?
Well, I think you might get your wish. I hear the Democrats are thinking of running Hillary Clinton as president and Michelle Obama as vice president in the next election.
Oh my gosh!
And I don't think it's going to work out as well as you think.
Those aren't. They're not even human. They're just people.
Oh, you want human women? Oh, I see.
They're aliens. They're I was talking to Jeff Mary Lou about the movie by John Carpenter, They Live.
Oh, I love that movie.
I was like, there's aliens among us.
I got one who can
not more real women.
Yeah, they're definitely not like us. That's for sure.
Yeah. No, well, I think you are right. I think there is definitely an inbred attitude towards living that women and men tend to be born with, and then it's either encouraged or discouraged, increased or decreased, whatever, depends on your upbringing. But I think there's truth to that, and I don't think it's sexist. I think it's just reality, and that's how we were, meant to be, because to bring up children and all that stuff. But it's something I think that we could use more of, is a localization of our of everything. And would you say that is the way to go? How do you feel about voluntarism and localization of the economies and of our society?
Well, I do think it is good. Where I live in Mexico, almost all the food that I eat is locally grown, and I like that. For the most part, it's organic. We just buy it at the local markets. We don't buy much food at all at places like Walmart and stuff like that. However, I'm a proponent of the free market, and I think the free market gives us the best products at the best price, and we have the option to choose. So if you do want, I'm sitting here right now with a Sony Vaio computer made in Japan. I wouldn't want to have to buy a local Mexican-made computer. I don't think there is one. So I think there's different perspectives on it, but I think as far as food goes, I think it's better if you can to grow it locally. Obviously, sometimes that's impossible. If you live in Las Vegas and you want sushi, that's going to be difficult. But I think, there's some definitely benefits to things like that. And I think the more that people think more locally, I think the better things are because, for example, let me give you an example with government. Usually the municipal governments aren't too terrible. And that's usually because they live in the community, people see them. If the mayor all of a sudden is driving a really expensive Mercedes, people are going to ask questions. They can kind of keep their eye on it, and they can kind of keep it somewhat under control. The bigger that it gets and the further away that it gets from you, the more that you have no idea what's going on. And these predators who always migrate into government can really take advantage of that. And so for that reason, I think in terms of government, I think if you want to have governments, I think we should have much more of them, not less. And we should have thousands of governments. Every city should be a government. Every neighborhood should have its own government. And eventually, if we're really good, we'll eventually have 7 billion governments on Earth, and it'll be the most peaceful and prosperous time we've ever had.
That's a great point. It brings me to the subject of representation. If we're going to have a government, as we have in the United States, let's do it the way it was planned to be and have representation, which we don't have. No one's being represented. We still have the same amount of representatives that we had 100 years ago, which is not the case in France. France actually has an amazingly high representation in its government, which is why its military budget is still just 7%. So I think that's another toward what you're talking about. If we can have more, if we're going to have government, let's have plenty of it so everyone's represented, Otherwise, let's do away with it completely. And I think that's a good point. I think that if every one of us was our own government, that would be the ideal.
Yeah, if you look back at the U.S., that's where it really started to go wrong was, of course, it was never perfect, but they had the separation of the states. The states had their own authority in their own area, and much different than what people saw in the movie Lincoln. Lincoln really ended all of that with his genocidal war against the South, and that's really was a fascist takeover of the U.S. to turn it into a federal system as opposed to a state system. So that was, again, going to less government, and that always gets worse. And if you even look at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, he has both hands on fasces. Fasces, the word fascism comes from a group of sticks that are wrapped in a thing to keep them together, and that's what both his hands are on. So he really brought the U.S. into fascism and into a much more centralized government, which is obviously much worse.
Oh, well, we have a Southerner here. You better be careful. Might get aroused on the
Oh, I agree totally.
Yeah, I agree too. Yeah, so you give me that you're talking about fascism and the group of sticks bound together. The image I get is that of binding everyone together in a centralized state. Is this what the roots of the word fascism is?
I actually forget the exact roots, but that's generally the thought is force and power, that it has to be centralized, and really it's evolved over time. Obviously, Italy was quite fascist, and what fascism really is a combination of the federal government with the corporations into one overseeing thing to control people, to monopolize industries, and to control things. And that's really what fascism is. And if you look at the U.S., there's so many instances. You look at Monsanto and how the Monsanto CEO is now runs the Environmental Protection Agency. They're very tied in now, and it's not
crazy,
good.
Isn't it? Yeah.
Corporatism.
Yeah,
that's right.
Corporatism. Yeah, I think. We have a huge problem there with corporatism. It's I think it's almost the two words are almost interchangeable, corporatism and fascism, because once corporations become as powerful and as big as they are, we lack a choice of where to go to choose, and that's like Monsanto is not just creating the crops; it's governing itself, and so it's a super corporation. It's no longer really a corporation. It's just an entity that's become quite destructive, I think.
Yeah, the insane thing is. The insane thing is that if you talk to most people that don't believe in true capitalism and freedom, they'll say the reason we need government is otherwise these corporations will just take over everything. And now look at the world that we live in today. The corporations and the government are one and the same.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have these kids that occupy Wall Street and all that, and they get it all confused, and they say, capitalism's bad, look at the U.S. Well, that's not capitalism, that's corporatism or fascism.
No. Mm-hmm. Right. I'm glad you said that. That really makes me crazy when people confuse corporatism and capitalism. It drives me nuts. There's nothing to do. It's like two different things. They're almost opposites, because capitalism is freedom. It's the ability to create what you want out of your environment, and it's what keeps a lot of the small economies going is free market capitalism, and it's important, I think, that people are able to practice this, Jeff, and corporatism is what squelches free market capitalism.
Yeah, it's very close to almost the Soviet Union style. Yeah, it's very close to the Soviet Union style nowadays, where you had basically the government operated all the industries, and that's almost what you have at the higher levels in the U.S. today. But most people don't see it, and they think, they're brainwashed to think they live in the land of the free, and the U.S. has capitalism. It used to have capitalism, but it doesn't anymore.
Mm-hmm. No, and a lot of these mega corporations were started off as small companies, and so people say, well, it's a slippery slope. You've got the capitalism started these corporations, so we can't go there. It's like they're throwing out the baby with the bathwater.
That's right.
They don't understand that it's the governmental part that enters into the whole scene that then creates these mega corporations. Yeah. And that's why we have the problem, is because we have a government that's become corrupt and can't control itself any longer. So that's and especially, I don't think we have an American government. I think right now what we have is a corporate-run control of American people. Would you agree with that, Jeff?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there's everything's out of control there. It's unbelievable to see all the changes, and the fact that they've managed to brainwash people into believing that they still live in a free country where they're being robbed of half their income every year. Every single industry is highly regulated. You wouldn't have regulations in capitalism. The entire money system is run by a private bank that is what you would never have in capitalism. You would never have a central bank that manipulates the interest rates and can counterfeit and print up as much currency as they want. And yet a lot of people in the U.S. still think they live in a free capitalist country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's nothing could be further from the truth, because I think it's very difficult now for small businesses to survive. And they, for example, homeopathic companies that I've used in the States have disappeared, and then I'll go to their internet site and they'll say, I'm sorry, we can't afford the testing that the government's required of us. It costs millions of dollars, we don't have it, so our product is no longer available.
That's right, and all those regulations. Sorry.
Mm. Yeah.
All those regulations. Sorry, we're on a delay here. Keep cutting you off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's essentially they're opposites, I think, and that's something I think people need to learn more about is how corporatism is a perversion of capitalism. It's just like a Monsanto GMO crop. It's not really a real plant. It's something that's been created that's not going to self-produce again. It's going to rob the soil of its nutrients, and then the lands become fallow. So it's I think that the difference between corporatism and capitalism needs to be stressed, and especially when we talk about anarcho-capitalism. Do you feel that there's some people who feel that there's opposite meanings between anarchy and capitalism, Jeff?
Going back to regulation, though, briefly, many people look at the world in the U.S. today, or the Western world, and they say, oh, these corporations are out of control, so we need to regulate them. It's usually the corporations, the big corporations themselves that want the regulation, because they can afford all the lawyers and all those things to get around those regulations. And what it does is it puts the smaller businesses out of business, because it just becomes too expensive to get around these regulations. The founder of Subway, he founded Subway restaurant. He founded it in the 1960s. He just said recently that there's no way he could start Subway today with all the regulations and taxes and things he would have to do. So that just goes to show it's just actually doing the opposite of what most people think. Getting to your point on people seeing the difference between anarchy and capitalism, I think more and more, and I think people like myself are spreading the word about what anarchy really is. We've debated anarcho-communists many times, and they always lose. And so, I think the internet sort of roots out a lot of these bad ideas over time, and I think that's one of the great things about the internet.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Unfortunately, we're out of time, but thank you so much for being our guest today, Jeff Berwick. We've really enjoyed it.
Oh, absolutely.
And we hope that you come back. And this is Gadsen Rising. I'm co-host and producer Mary Lou Van Houten with host Libby Gadsen. And thank y'all so much for listening, and we'll talk to y'all later.
Yeah, bye. Thank you, Jeff. Talk to you later. We'll be back on Monday.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.